Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Q'd podcast. Once again, here with you for this wonderful episode about AMD is Mark, and of course, I'm joined by Nick.
Hey, what's up, man?
Nothing much, bro. Good to be back. A pleasure to hear your voice again, as it always is. More so now than ever, though. Uh, Scheduling a faux pas must be admitted to, and we are deeply apologetic about missing last week. So we wanted to jump into it this week, which was going to be our normal scheduled one. But on top of this one, we're going to try and catch back up by a second one next weekend. We're going to maintain the release schedule of a Friday, Saturday release, but we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that one was missed. And Nick, I think you agree with me. We felt pretty bad about it.
Yeah, I mean, stuff happens, but I'm sure people realize that well, they're gonna get their fix.
Well, and the fix for this week is going to be something that is another hot topic, so to speak. I know we've been talking about how we want to go divulge more into the history of things or the lineage of things in terms of the tech field or entertainment field or a combination of the two. But there's too many headlines, man. There's too many things happening in the world of technology. This week, a company that has always been near and dear to my heart because they're a company that I have always from day one used their products through the good, through the bad, and back to the good again. And that's AMD. And the big news that was dropped is the Zen 3, which I don't know about you, Nick, but I liked what I saw. How about you?
Yeah, over the past few years, AMD has really kind of carved out a nice shell for itself of like the market, and they've been slowly chipping it away at Intel's market in the personal computer area.
Yeah, but it's been a long time. I mean, well, they had some success back with the FX chip line, the FX64 chip line. That was the first computer I built, was an AMD FX64 system.
Athlon. Yeah.
Athlon, yeah, the Athlon. It was an Athlon X6. It was Athlon 64 X2. So
Yeah.
it was a dual core Athlon, and that was the first computer I built. And I had stuck with AMD, much to the chagrin of some and the humor of others. But nonetheless, I feel like I'm getting my payoff in terms of being a consumer of theirs this long. Um, I'm personally quite impressed with what I saw. I'm impressed with the increase in terms of like a 20%, 28%, I believe, performance increase from the Zen 2 to Zen 3. But yeah, what was your main takeaway? I'm sure you watched the presentation. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the articles on it. What was your takeaway on it?
Yeah, so like you, I actually, one of my first computers also had a 64X Black Edition inside of it.
Oh yeah.
So I had like a pretty love-hate relationship with AMD. Although I liked the first computer I built, it didn't really, at that time, like all the Intel quad core stuff was coming out, like Core 2 Quad or whatever it was called.
The Duo.
Yeah, like literally the first generation of the Intel quad cores, and what happened was it just swept the market. Like literally, all the gaming machines were moving. All gaming PC machines were moving to using those quad cores instead of dual core processors, like pretty much all that AMD had at the time. But we like talking about modern day stuff, like we see a huge market shift, right? And or like a huge tech shift. Whereas like we have Intel, which has always been really good at single core throughput, right? Just making single cores as fast as they can go. And then AMD over time, starting with, argumentatively starting with the architecture that was Bulldozer, just investing in heavily threaded CPUs. And then we've seen after, I don't even know, like 5, maybe 6 years of iteration or longer, we've seen them kind of perfect that and make an architecture that can have both large amounts of cores plus fast cores.
Well, you're right. I mean, one of the drawbacks of AMD was always single-threaded processing. I think an argument can be made that their multi-threaded processing abilities uh, was in a way favored because you got some pretty good multi-threaded processing for a really fair price. Intel, of course, had the crown for quite some time, and you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of when they started experimenting with a new development style of chip, where it was the FX series, the FX 8350, for example. I had an FX chip, I had a bulldozer, and I had a pile driver, which came after that, and that was AMD's first shot or first attempt at trying to really compete or recompete against Intel. They started bringing in the 4 cores. I think they had a 6 core. Well, yeah, because they had the 8350, the 8150. Well, a whole lineage of them. Was it a Vishera chipset or family? Whatever it was. They started experimenting with 4, 6, 8 CPUs, trying to nip at the heels of Intel. But a drawback that they always had was that, especially for people that were gamers, it was it was a good chip. It's going to get you a nice computer. It's going to feel good when you play. Is it going to outperform somebody that comes to the LAN party at that time, or literally comes to the table with an Intel computer? Probably not. I mean, you had better RAM profiles with XMP RAM profiles. You had better compatibility of CPU to GPU, because of the bottleneck that the cache system that AMD was using could sometimes play a factor in issues in terms of how the RAM was performing and how the GPU was performing. Yeah, there were issues, but for the price, I don't know how you felt about this, but for the price, I felt pretty good about that AMD chipset, although it had a lot of flaws.
Yeah. You talking about like in earlier chipsets and their price point, or like the newer stuff that they're talking about now?
Yeah, the FX. I mean, because you brought up the pile driver and the
Right.
bulldozer. I mean, I felt good about where they were progressing on too, is what I meant by that. Like, I had one of each, and it wasn't incremental performance increase. I always noticed a decrease in gaming performance. Don't get me wrong; it was expected, but I was able to build a decent PC for a very fair price. Well, now, I mean, yeah, pricing, they're getting a little more aggressive with their pricing. I don't mean aggressive in terms of trying to uh, get a price decrease. Their new Ryzen chips are going to run a decent amount of money. I think it was around $800 for a 3900X or something like that. I think that's one of their higher end models.
Well, I still think they're beating Intel on pricing too. Now I could be wrong, but I believe that they are though. Like, uh, I mean, the price points honestly of what they provide didn't really seem that unreasonable to me for what you get. You're talking about like almost double the amount of cores that Intel's going to give you, right? Plus threads, and then you're meeting the same speeds as an Intel core. Now, what's really going to matter and what will really show us how much of a difference this makes is whether or not something called the microarchitecture is just as good as Intel's. Now, like, although that these CPUs adhere to the same x86, x64 standard, how those things are implemented are obvious. They're going to be different between microprocessor manufacturer. So people that actually spend the time making these actual, CPUs. That's the reason why Intel has been able to. It's not just the overall architecture of the way the core works. It's also inherently their microarchitecture. So like how specific assembly instructions execute were just faster.
What do you mean? Are you literally referring to the manufacturing process of the chip itself?
No, so microcode, you can think of it like both the Intel and AMD CPUs can have an assembly instruction for add multiply or something, right? Or like let's just say multiply two numbers. Now, how that's implemented can be completely different depending on whether it's an Intel chip or an AMD chip. So like how it's implemented is called microcode. So literally like how that thing works um, is just gonna be inherently different And sometimes it can be fast and sometimes it can be slow. So like on our last episode when we were talking about Apple, we talked about how, I don't know if you like, their mobile devices all use ARM chips. So
Yeah.
their ARM chipset, they actually manufacture their own ARM chipset, and their ARM chips are way faster than something like Snapdragon. And the reason is because their microcode is faster and works more efficiently than somebody like a silicon provider like Snapdragon.
Okay.
So like all I'm saying basically is like, yes, these numbers look great. Everything looks fantastic, but there still could be shit underneath, if that makes sense. Like I hope that there's not, but it's certainly possible that it could still not be as good as we all think.
Well, I mean, the Ryzen 3 chips, which are going to be running, just to clarify, by the way, the 5000 series processor. So it's not going to be the 3000 because they already use that number. So they're trying to avoid confusion.
Mm.
So when you look at the charts, if you see a 5900, for example, that's going to be a Zen 3. Now, so you're saying when I look at these numbers, for example, what's a popular game? League of Legends, Direct X11 version, 21% improvement, 21% better performance, I should say, with Ryzen 5900X versus the Intel i9 10900, 10900K. Counter Strike, for example, not that that's a demanding game, but that's a 19% increase. Battlefield 5 3, Total War 3 Kingdoms 1%. So you're saying though that those specs, those numbers, they're not necessarily to be trusted.
Well, it's not that they're like, first of all, they're trying to sell you a chip. So I'm not
Oh, for
saying that they're
sure, yeah.
being disingenuous, but like just like I wouldn't really necessarily trust Nvidia's numbers, like because they manufacture the GPU or whatever it is. The same with Intel. Like I'm gonna wait until somebody actually gives me real stats. And the reality of some of this situation is like, of course they're gonna get performance gains on these things because they've increased the speed, the frequency of which their chips run at, right? So like I'm looking at the list now. So let's go. Like their slowest chip, it looks like in this set was it the Ryzen 5 5600X?
5600X up to 4.6
And its
boost with a
base
3.7.
is, yeah, 3.7. So that's the lowest base, right? Which is
Yeah.
still pretty good. Like 3.7 and then turbo to 4.6. So
For
like
$300, that's fine. I mean, yeah, I mean,
right. So it's you're gonna get a performance increase just because you depending on, I don't even remember what they compare it against. Do the charts say explicitly what they're comparing it against?
Core i9 10900K.
Yeah. So what's the clock speed on that? Core
Not
i9
sure. I'll have to look it up.
300K. Yeah, might as well. So is it Core i9?
i9.
Is it the 99 or 93?
It says 10900K. That's what the AMD Ryzen chart says. That is comparing it against the company's Core i9 10900K model. That's here, I have it here. Offers 10 cores, 20 threads, 125 watt TDP boost speeds, 5.3 gigahertz, according to Intel, is the world's fastest gaming processor. And that's what AMD is comparing their chipset against.
What's the clock
And
speed?
5.3.
5.3, and it's somehow, yeah, like I don't know, man.
Hey, that's
so you're
okay.
look like, do you see what I'm saying? Like look at the numbers. Turbo boosted 3.7 gigahertz, right? Or 4.6 gigahertz on the 5600X, right? And then you're comparing it with a chip that supposedly runs, you're talking about like in orders of like it's literally running like a quarter more of the speed of this. and
Yeah,
it's somehow slower.
well, yeah, but I mean, gigahertz at some point are. I mean, you're going to get not a reduction on return per se, but I mean, you can only go so high with gigahertz. You got to make sure you have a good cache to actually communicate and use the speed. You know, what I mean,
Right.
there's, I
So
mean,
what? Sorry, what was the name of the chip again? The Core i9, which
10
model?
900, 10
10.
900K, 10 cores, 20 threads.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just 10 900K. I just want to look up the stats too. I see it. Okay. I just want to compare the two, right? Like, okay, so the base frequency is actually 3.7. The
yeah,
max is 5.3.
yeah.
Okay, the cache size. I assume this is this all cache size, or is this, because it doesn't actually specify? It must be. It says it's just 20 megabytes, which is kind of weird because normally they give you like L1, L2, L3 cat. Like they'll tell you
Well, that's the
which.
beauty with what AMD is doing, though, is it not? Because they had a L3 and they had, like, for example, they would have a cache and 4 cores, a cache and 4 cores to get their 8-core processor. So a 16 megabyte and 16 megabyte. The Zen 3, from what I understand, is going to be one whole 32 megabyte cache, right? The smack dab of the center of it, to reduce lag throughput between the core communication, which is going to supposedly give you better single core threading performance. That's their main selling point. Um, yeah,
Caching is such a weird thing to talk about, but yet, like, what you're talking about can like, really, there's trade-offs between everything when you talk about. So okay, like, let's just talk about, like, real quick what the different caches are, just to clear things up. So normally in modern, like other modern CPUs, you have something called L1, L2, L3 cache. L1 cache is usually just like every CPU will ship with, like, every actual physical CPU, every core will ship with like an L1 and I believe an L2. And then L3 is shared between all of them. So I don't know the specifics of the new Zen chips, but you're saying that they're gonna have like a some type of large, like all the cache pools are shared.
right. So instead of having, so on a Zen 2, you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at a 16 megabyte L3 cache with 4 cores, and then another 16 megabyte L3 cache with another 4 CPU cores. Zen 3 is designed to take those two middle caches, those two L3s, and sandwich them together into one 32 megabyte cache. And essentially,
Oh, I see.
from what
Yeah.
I gathered, that's going to dramatically improve latency for the tasks, which is going to put them, according to them, ahead of the pack instead of being behind, by a runner or two
Right.
for single threaded processes, which has always been their handicap, if you will.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly how the Intel Core i9 cache is implemented, and I can't find actual like information on this, which is kind of absurd because all I get inside their website is it just tells me that there's 20 megabytes of Intel Smart Cache. Like, I have no
What
idea.
does that even mean?
Yeah, like, and it's got like a trademark on it too, so it's
Of
like, okay,
course.
great. Like, okay, so let's see. Yeah, it's so hard to
I sent
find
you
any
something.
information on this.
Check. I sent you. I DM'd
Discord.
you
Yeah.
what I
Oh
was
no,
looking.
I found the. So that makes sense, right? So like the so basically your L3 cache is always going to have a lot of your data inside of it, right? So if for some reason Intel's Core i9 has a terrible caching system, even if you could have the fastest CPU in the world, like you're still going to be bottlenecked by memory access times, right? So like
Yeah.
if if all that this does for really for the AMD chips, the Zen 3 generate like the Zen 3 chips, is that it unifies them so that way any type of process that swaps from core to core So like if you're playing a game and your operating system decides to swap from Core 1 to Core 2, and Core 2 happens to be like let's picture Zen 2. So Zen 2, you have, I think you said you have 4 cores per every L3 cache, right? And
If you're doing the 8 core Zen 2, yes.
yeah, okay, so 4 cores. We'll just go that route. Let's say that you're on this cluster, this of like we'll call it cluster 1 and cluster 2. You're playing a game. Your operating system for some reason decides I need to swap tasks because you alt tab or something. And then when you alt tab back into the game, it's like, okay, well, this core that you were previously on, the cluster 1, is busy doing other stuff. Now we're going to switch all that stuff on the cluster 2. Now all that data lives in that 16 megabyte cache in cluster 1, but now you're on cluster 2. So all that data has to be loaded back in from main memory into your cache. So like that's a huge performance hit. And if that's what like the Intel Core i9 is doing, then it makes sense like the Zen 3 would see a boost, if that makes sense. Like unifying that cache pool will allow, like just like what you're saying, will allow them to like optimize for cases like that.
Yeah, so that, for me, that if I were to look at it that way, that tells me, well, if you have an 8-cylinder vehicle and you have a 6-cylinder vehicle, I mean, you're naturally going to think the 8-cylinder is going to be faster. But if you do everything right, and if you get your timings right, and if you get your tuning correctly, you can make a 6-cylinder and make it good enough to put in a 4 GT. Is all I'm saying, and it's going to win some. It's going to win some races. AMD doesn't have to. AMD doesn't have to throw the most horsepower to win the race. They just have to be the most methodical with their performance and how they drive that performance, in my opinion. Uh, the combined L2, L3 cache, by the way, for the 5900 is going to be 70 megabytes. The 5950X is going to be a combined 72 megabytes. It's, of course, going to be the AM4 chipset. So, yeah, I mean, Ryzen 5950 is going to be a 16 core, 32 thread. 5900 is a 12 core, 24 thread. And the 5800 is going to be the 8 core, 16. And then you can kind of figure out where it goes from there.
Yeah. So I think it's important to say that like this on paper this looks great. And right now it seems like it's going to be, not, I don't think Intel's going anywhere, but they're definitely going to take a huge hit because of this architecture and because of what AMD has been able to do over the last few years with the Zen brand.
Why do you think this has happened to Intel? Do you think they became stagnant? Are they going to be BlackBerry? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think this happened because they were so narrowly focused on. This is what Intel does, right? And this is what history has taught us with Intel, is that, and honestly, the story of Intel and AMD has been so back and forth. It's just Intel has been in the spotlight for such a longer period of time than really, honestly, I think anybody actually expected. So let's talk about like single core and dual core processors. At one point AMD was like considered kind of the front runner in dual core, and quad cores come out. AMD fell behind, right? And they felt like argumentatively they fell behind pretty much at that point until now. And I don't think Intel's going away anywhere. Like I think the reason why what ends up happening is like they literally are, it's like they spent so much time up at the top of the mountain that they forgot what it looks like at the bottom. And now AMD is going to kick them back down to the back down to the bottom, and they got to climb their way back up.
Well, isn't AMD, aren't they, doesn't Intel use something that AMD, I can't remember what it is. AMD is responsible for creating a standard, aren't they?
Yeah. So the AMD standard is x64, which is typically why. So I believe it's x64, AMD x64. So they were the first ones, I believe, to create a 64-bit processor. Yeah, so the Athlon 64, I think, might have been the first one. I don't remember.
No, no, it was. That's why. But I mean, I
Okay.
remember I had the leg up I had was that compared to all my friends, I had a 64-bit processor. What it could do back then, God only knows. I don't think it was having that big of effect on my Quake and my Half Life. But what do I know?
Yeah. So uh X64 was just a standard that was set, and then the following was X. They call it X86, X86, X64, but most people just call it X64. But yeah, the first 64-bit processor based on X86, meaning that it's compatible with 30. Like the biggest reason the reason why this was such a big deal was because it was backwards compatible with all the X60 X86 stuff. So like meaning all the 32-bit processors that came before this processor, like you could literally plug, if the socket types matched, you can plug in this processor and run the same amount of like software on it. So it was a pretty big deal.
Actually, another thing I was trying to think of is that when it was in the 80s, I just had to look it up because I couldn't remember it. But AMD became a second supplier for Intel, which also gave AMD access to the 286 chip technology. So that was a interesting thing that I used to find really cool. How the if it weren't for one, the other wouldn't exist, is what it seems like happened at a period of time there. That back when they were both bidding for like IBM's attention, for example. Um, but yeah, so
So just to clear something up real quick, like AMD was not like the first person to make a 64-bit processor. They were the first ones to make a compatible x86 64-bit processor. Like so, it was compatible with 32-bit, the prior x86 base. So that's the reason why it was so important.
also for the new chipset, just to go back to that real quick, because I was looking into it. It's a 19% improvement in the instructions per clock from Zen 2 to Zen 3.
So that's usually uh, that means that they've improved their microarchitecture, or when they talk about, they're saying instructions per clock, or like per cycle, or I mean per clock is different than per cycle, but um, it's those are things that are dealing with like the how it works underneath, like the microarchitecture.
And as far as the gaming performance, that's apparently driving them to a reported average 26% increase of AMD friendly games. Now, that right there, that's one of those caveats, you know what I mean, in terms of
Yeah.
it doesn't really specify what that means. Are they running games that does that mean they're running games on an AMD CPU with a Radeon GPU crossfire? And you know what I mean? Like, are we talking like
Right.
a built from the ground up, best played on AMD kind of thing? Hard to say. The important thing to take away, I think, though, in terms of its overarching performance, in terms of gaming, well, actually, just in general, in terms of people that may have skipped Gen 2 like I did. I didn't get a Ryzen 2. I'm still running a Ryzen 1. I'm having great results still from the Ryzen 1. I feel like, and we talked about this in our first episode, I still feel like an incremental upgrade in GPU is going to give me the performance boost I need to drive life even longer out of this Ryzen 1 setup that I have. I'm not going to get the superior transfer rate speeds for my RAM or anything like that in terms of a 2 or a 3. That's fine. It's just a gaming computer. At the end of the day, it's good enough results. But these numbers, that might make you turn the corner. It'll make me turn the corner, that's for sure. I mean, we're not talking incremental updates. We're going to get a frame or two more, or the CPU isn't going to make that big of a difference. They're really driving home the fact that they're maintaining their strong lead or their strong marketplace value in multitasking, coupled with a now presumed lead against Intel, even though Intel has their 11th gen Rocket Lake CPUs that are going to be around in early 2021. So we'll have to see. But even with them having a new chip on the horizon, it, they've already missed out on a lot of lucrative opportunities. I mean, let's talk about for a minute how AMD they've solidified themselves as a viable company to invest in because they are going to be the only ones that power the new gaming consoles. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a big grab, in
that's
my
a huge
opinion.
deal. That's a that's a way to boost up your stock price for sure. Is
Yeah.
being just somehow managing to not just wrangle one major console. So like it's one thing if you get one of the Xboxes or the Microsoft brand console or the Sony brand console, but getting both of them, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think that's again just another example of Intel being in a too high to fail mindset in terms of maybe I mean who knows if they were competitively bidding or not anyway, but one would assume they would have enjoyed having a deal like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure I'm sure Intel's not going anywhere. But that being said, like this is nothing to scoff at from Intel's perspective. They need to take this seriously, and I really do hope that this drives more innovation at Intel. Like I want to see, not that I have anything. I like AMD, and honestly, this chipset looks amazing. And if I'm going to build a new computer soon, it's probably going to be with this chipset. Like it's probably going to be with this CPU using whatever one of the best latest motherboards that supports this particular. Like, does the socket type change? And usually
No.
AMD is like really good at that.
No, it's still the 7, it's still optimized 7 was it nanometer? What is it?
Yeah, so they have 7 and 12 listed. So
Yeah, this one is still the AM4. It's still 7. It's yeah, I mean basically if you have a like mine's AM3. If you have an AM4 board, you could just do a drop in. You could just drop this thing in and it's going to work fine. I think Intel is still at like is that 14, I think, or something like that.
mhm.
But yeah, no, the chipset is not changing. I for one want to know where you would justify getting like an $800 Threadripper when you can get a Zen 3 Ryzen chipset that's apparently going to walk away from Intel. You know what I mean? Like, because I was looking at their chip offerings, and Threadripper is still up there. I guess that'd be more that's not going to be for a gamer per se, though. I would assume.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think. I mean, any of these Zen 3 really, honestly, if we're being all honest, really anything at max, like maybe a gamer needs like the 5800X. Like anything else is a bit overkill. Like you also have to remember that like most video games don't even like a vast majority of video games still struggle with the concepts of like using multi cores. Just because it's like most like you're pretty much locked. Just the way game development works, you are pretty much locked into using like single cores. Like there's edge cases and there's certain tricks that you can do, but it's just more common. That's why you like, especially in old. If you, I don't know if you saw this, but like in older games, on those specs where they had like, I think CS:GO was like a good example of that. They got like a pretty minimal performance gain on the Zen 3. I don't remember the exact percentages, but
No, I think it was 16, to be honest.
um,
I think the strategy game I mentioned was like a 1%. Let me see actually. CS:GO. Oh no, this is a Ryzen versus a Ryzen. 46% increase in performance from a Ryzen 3900 versus a Ryzen 5900. I mean that right there, that's badass. But um, let me see. I just had it here. I'll find it in a second. I did want to mention something though about the whole gaming thing. Their games started to even have a separate setting where you, and I don't know if you remember this, some of the, I think Doom 3 might have had it, where you had to select if it was a multi-core setup or not.
Right.
Because if it wasn't a multi-core setup and you try to run it through a multi-core, or well, if you don't check that box and try and run it, it actually runs like shit. And that was a problem with multi-cores for a while there, at AMD specifically, because they had a, a poor option to go backwards to a single thread. So if it wasn't optimized for multi-core technology, then you were going to suffer a little bit. But there was a time there where if you had I don't think I was really torn between buying a multi-core when I first built my AMD computer or not, because at that point it wasn't a matter of optimization. It was more of a status. It was more of a standard when you go on the forums or search for it. That back then they said, no, gaming computer, single core chip, dual core maybe at the most. But yeah, there was a time where a multi-core chipset could be a detriment, especially to a gaming PC. But with the advancements they're making in both a centralized focus on trying to make a single-threaded process go through, combined with a still really high-level multi-thread option, I mean, we're getting to that point where it's not going to matter one way or another. We're getting to that point where it's going to be a good chip is a good chip again. It can just do multiple things, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I just found the graph too. Um, but yeah, like this is, it's hard to tell because this is like a 19% increase when it's compared to the Core i9, right? So it's like, okay, like it doesn't really tell me. Like it'd be better to know in other instances what that means, right? So like a 19% increase doesn't really get me what I was like looking for necessarily.
Well, they set another record that we could talk about, versus the i9 10900K. They're the first desktop processor to break 600 points for single thread performance
Yeah.
in Cinebench.
Right. So that's a pretty big deal too. So once again, that's like nothing to scoff at. If your Intel is, it's a pretty big deal to be able to break that record and show that you not only beat them on the amount of physical cores and threaded cores, but you are also beating them in core speed.
And I think for the performance per dollar, if you compare the 5800 to the, I think it was the 10700K, I think. Let me see. Yeah, it's 10700 i7. Single threaded performance per dollar, you have an increase of 9% with the Ryzen. Multi threaded performance per dollar, you have 11% increase. And 1080p performance per dollar, you have a tie. But even then, to have a tie, that's pretty legit. Um, I I think another cool thing about this is that if Intel is going to change their socket size, their chipset size, their layout, you're looking at a whole rebuilding your entire computer infrastructure. AMD has been able to once again capitalize at reusing and recycling a chipset that they've been able to get more and more out of, and now again just plug and play. You're not going to have to invest in a new motherboard or anything like that. It's just, hey, here's the chip, plug and play upgrade. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's always going to be downsides to that, and you'll probably have maybe some performance hit depending on the scenario, like in the future. But yeah, I like that they offer that, and that's something that AMD has offered for a long time. I mean, they really try to make their socket types last as long as possible.
I saw let me see, Zen 3 has a 19% IPC uplift for PCs. Geomean of 25 workloads, fixed 4 gigahertz frequency, 8 core is a 19% increase. Zen 3 performance contributors, cache prefetching, execution engine, branch predictor, micro op cache. So I mean, there's a lot. I just think it's impressive with what they're doing. I mean, they promised since Ryzen 1, since the Zen chip, they promised that they were developing some chips and some chipsets that are going to be rivaling, if not pushing Intel to the limit and driving technology. They have essentially kept their word, as far as I'm concerned, especially with the new Zen 3 architecture. And as far as I know, and maybe we have. Oh, actually, here's yeah, here we go. I just wanted to look at this. Here's the cache thing that we were talking about. Um, there was something I wanted to say about that. Well, anyway, I think that they're finally starting to put their money where their mouth is in terms of all the R&D that they've been doing. So the 2x L3 cache directly accessible per core. That was Zen 2. No, excuse me. This is Zen 3. Accelerates core and cache communication for gaming, reduction in effective memory latency. So that's their big selling point. That's what they're trying to say is going to be the driving factor to keep these speeds where they're at. And I was wondering, did you see if they have any updates in terms of how they're going to be able to increase their communication speed with RAM? I didn't see anything because Intel has always kind of had the upper hand in that one.
No. I mean, that's going to be the biggest bottleneck for any manufacturer right now. Like, honestly, once that problem's solved, once we figure out a better solution to the current solution, it's going to be a much different world. I don't know what, like, it's so weird to think about that particular problem. I mean, memory access has always kind of been a pretty big bottleneck.
For
which is
AMD
why, well, I mean, I don't know really why it would be different. Is it just because it doesn't support certain, like, their chips don't support certain, like, I don't know,
profiles?
like, you're talking about, like, it doesn't support, like, a 3000 hertz, like, RAM, like DDR4 or something.
Yeah, I think right. So for my Ryzen 1, I think I had to flash the BIOS like 3 times just to try and get it to update to 3200 megahertz.
Mm-hmm.
Intel had already superseded that speed even when these chips came out. So again, they had some good selling points, but their overarching communication abilities to everything else in the computer was lagging a little bit behind. The benefit, of course, for someone like myself was, yeah, it's a true to form improvement, and as long as if it's an improvement to what you already own, then go with it. You know, it's still going to be better. You're going to feel better about it. But at the end of the day, even their new stuff was still a little behind Intel's existing stuff,
So
and that's always been the. Go ahead.
No, sorry, you go. You go.
Oh, I was pretty much done. I was just saying that I think that's always been one of the things that people like to draw attention to is that, okay, yeah, AMD is better here than it was before, but you can only compare AMD to AMD at that point to really get any kind of performance or compare it to a chipset from Intel that's from a prior generation.
So just looking at, I'll share this page with you. This is actually pretty useful. It's called, like, WikiChip. It looks like they're going to support the frequency. Their base frequency is 3700 megahertz. Oh no, that's for their. Is that for their? Oh, okay. Yeah, this one doesn't list it. Some of the other chipsets will actually show you what they support as far as, like, RAM speed.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess it probably. I wonder why they don't show it on here.
I haven't been able to find anything. That's what I'm saying. Like that's why I was asking you. I have not seen anything because
Well, it's probably coupled with the fact that it does depend on what your motherboard supports too. But it does actually. If scrolling all the way to the bottom, it shows, like, a listed of support. It says its supported memory type is DDR4 3200. And that's probably inherently just due to the socket type. So unless they change socket types, it looks like they might be bottlenecked by that. If there's faster, if there is faster frequency RAM on the horizon, I don't even know what RAM is at now. Like, I don't know if 3200 standard or if that's considered slow. Like, I have no idea. But
But you could overclock it with with the Ryzen 3000 series. You could overclock it to like 5000 if I remember correctly.
mhm.
But I think, I mean,
So here's the thing: that memory type, when you overclock that particular memory to that much, you're just asking for trouble.
well, I have, if I were to push mine to the limit and stress it for a long period of time, like I could probably get an evening or two of gaming out of it. But I suffer severe instability
Right.
uh,
That's.
at
I mean,
certain moments of time. Yeah,
you're gonna have probably lots of crashes.
yeah.
I mean, the reason is because the RAM literally isn't made to support that frequency. And
Well,
what?
I get RAM check BSODs
Yes.
whenever I would screw around with that, and
Yeah.
that was one of the. I think I think I've even, it's happened to me as we've talked before, like years ago. I remember having that was always one of my issues with me because I always do everything myself in terms of frequencies, voltages, tuning, uh, the um the timing. I always do it myself. I either uh, give it a little more breathing room depending on my performance, or I try and tighten it even a little beyond its specs. And one thing I will say about my Ryzen 1 setup is that one of the most, not I would not frustrating, one of the uh one of the most sensitive things you can do is fuck with its RAM communication.
Yeah. I believe it. I mean, RAM communication is, yeah, it's a pretty sensitive process. And when you mess with stuff like that, you're literally messing with, like, you're not, when you stop and think about what you're doing, you're messing with the amount of electricity stored inside of the capacitors and how long they are refreshed. And, like, you're just asking for trouble. Like, it's probably not advisable to do that.
Have you seen anything about have you seen anything about their wattages?
Yeah, it's actually looks pretty low, I guess.
Like 142?
Here's
Or
the
maybe I'm not looking at the,
I'll send you
yeah.
this guide now. So here's Zen 3, I think. So again, wiki chip is what I'm sending him. It's pretty good little wiki site. Check it out if you have never heard of it. And I'll have all the CPUs you'd ever want. But yeah, like you can see here, um, the 5600 is 65 watts, and then we jump
Oh,
up quite
yeah.
a bit at the 5800X, which is 105. But they keep it at 105 throughout the rest of these. So it's pretty impressive that they were able to do that.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to build a new PC, like I mean, what I want would probably be the 5950X. What I'd actually get would honestly, like, because I'm cheap, I'd probably get the 5600X.
Well,
Um, it's not bad
realistically
though.
speaking, what would you, I mean, the 5950 are, I mean, will you ever use that many? I mean, you'll probably get a new
No.
chip before you ever really see what it can do.
No. I mean, like, I'd have. That's the thing. I'd need a project to work on, like, programming wise, that would need that much CPU power. And honestly, I can't think of anything that I couldn't do with 6 cores, 12 threads. So,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm
I
I'm
go
also not
58.
running like a streaming studio or anything. So,
Yeah, I'd
there's
probably go 5800.
yeah,
I mean, I mean, every computer I've had, dating back to when I could do it, has been 8 core. I had an FX 8 core chip, and there was no no, I had the Black Edition X4, but I did also have one of the 8 cores. Um, yeah, I don't know. Something about, I don't know. I feel like it's a good number.
yeah.
I
I
don't know,
mean, I'm
6.
still on 4 core 8 logical. I'm still, and honestly, like, this is still fine. Like, this is still great. Like, there's nothing wrong. Like, I don't have any. This computer's a beast. Like, I still To reach its limits on what it can do is pretty difficult. Um, yeah, I just most of the time I'm like peeking out one or two cores, like especially when I'm playing a game. Like I'm not really like peeking out the entire all that like everything.
Oh yeah, no, I mean we talked about that in the GPU episode too. I mean, I don't see I don't think I've ever, outside of just having fun and fucking around and just running numbers, I don't think I've ever peaked more than I mean, I don't think I've ever used all 8 cores on my on my CPU, to be honest.
Yeah.
The do you think because these are now in consoles coupled with their graphics drivers, I mean, do you think we're going to start seeing more software development or games developed with multi-core in mind? Do you think consoles are going to possibly drive that more than PC because it's more or less locked in to its mainframe at this point, so you really have no choice? I mean, if you want your game to look and run the best, you're going to have to make it work with the Ryzen, the Zen 3 now. Do you think we're going to notice any kind of game or graphical bump due to this technology?
Yeah, so I do think that what's going to end up happening is, like you said, the uh, I think like console programmers are gonna console programmers are gonna always have less resources than PC programmers. I mean, for the most part, right? We can generally assume that's the case because
Yeah.
consoles are generally cheaper, and you can always in PCs you can always tune it for lower end and always tune it for higher end PCs or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, like I think we're gonna definitely because well now especially because everything in consoles are x86, x64. Um, we're gonna it's just like a whole new generation of stuff is gonna happen. I think people are, especially in the programming world, trying to think of ways to solve problems that are considered something called embarrassingly parallel. Uh, I mean, like examples of that is like rasterization on a GPU. It was so embarrassingly parallelizable that they literally built a GPU to do it. So um, I think that we'll probably start to see in the upcoming years more games make use of it somehow. Now, what that means for at this moment right now, I have no idea.
Well, I mean, I think it would drive people like myself to have a forced upgrade, and that's kind of what I was thinking about. How quick graphic cards are moving from the Voodoo 3 days all the way up to now, and how we can kind of get by now with for about 4 or 5 years with a graphic card. Like my 1080 is still fine, although I'd like a new one to get the performance increase that it offers. I think if you start developing software to match and to be finely tuned to these new CPUs coupled with these new generation GPUs, which what a timely launch in terms of AMD. I know we don't and actually that's the thing too, and this is not the topic at hand, but I mean it's worth at least mentioning. I mean, it's being reported that their GPUs are already looking to take it to the NVIDIA 3080 and 3090. So, can you imagine the mainstream, uh, or even the enthusiast marketplace of PC builders just all of a sudden saying that they would prefer an AMD chip with an AMD graphic card? I I'm an A I'm an AMD big AMD fan. They get a lot of business from me. I have never bought an AMD GPU. I don't like them. I don't believe in them. But hey, I think it's about that time. I don't know. I'm thinking about just going all AMD.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the stats come out with and what they look like. I mean, right now, the on the last our first episode when we talked about GPUs, the new NVIDIA GPU is looking like quite a monster, and it's also incredibly difficult to find. But that being said, it's if some of the Radeon series come out and they happen to be serious contenders with that, and it's at a lower price point, my wallet is going to be happy. Like I'm definitely going to purchase one of those. There's really, in my mind, it's about how much of a performance increase I can get for the amount of money that I'm spending. Because in the reality is like in 3 to 4 years, I'm going to be buying something new again, and I don't want to keep having like shelling out hundreds of dollars to Nvidia when I can buy something that's almost either slightly less as good or a little bit or better, which is like a great case for cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, it's just cool to think of. Like, I would definitely jump over to an AMD full AMD build. Finally, for once, use my manually disabled Crossfire setup and have to manually disable the chips because if you want to get a good AMD motherboard, it's going to be AMD. Unless you, I mean, I had to buy. There was a specific chipset that I had to buy for the Ryzen motherboard that would allow you to really take advantage of one or the other SLI or Crossfire. I have one of those boards, um, but to be able to natively take advantage of a new Zen 3 chipset with a new motherboard that is designed from the ground up for said chipset with the integrated Crossfire, I'm starting to think AMD is looking like a better. I'm starting to think AMD for the price is looking like the way to go. I mean, we're starting to see more companies, PC building companies, Origin and some other companies have a pretty large stock of AMD chips and Threadripper series chips. I think I think Intel just forgot to check the rearview mirror one too many times, and now I feel like they're about to get passed or they're about to get rolled up on pretty quick.
Yeah. Um, it's going to be an interesting next year to say. I think, in the development of AMD and Intel. Like, really now, like what can AMD now do? Like, how can they push it to the limit? Or and also the same can be said for Intel. Like, how is Intel going to answer this? Like, a lot of people, especially recently, have been talking about this being an Intel killer. I don't think it's going to be an Intel killer. Intel has proven that it's stepped up to the plate in the past, so I don't really think it's going to be any different than this situation. And honestly, the more situations like this occur, the better for the consumer, right? Like, we're going
Yep.
to get better stuff, which is great. Like, why wouldn't we want that? And we might actually get it at cheaper price points too.
I don't think it's going to be an Intel destroyer, but I think it's going to be a a market shaking event. I do think it's going
Yeah.
to be a disruptor of some kind for sure. The response to that disruption is going to be in Intel's court. They will single handedly be able to decide just how they approach this and how strongly they respond to it. In my opinion, I'm just happy to see, even if it's for a limited time, it is just refreshing and fun and exciting to see the feels that we had when the Athlon 64 struggled and stressed its way past Intel to plant its flag on the top of the mountain. Now, granted, Intel climbed down and just went to the mountain that was bigger next to it, climbed up. That's neither here nor there. The point is that AMD has now joined them on that mountaintop and planted their flag. And as you said, and I think we both agree, it's now the ball's in Intel's court to make the next big play. But not as long of an episode as before, but I do think we got to the point. We just wanted to make sure that we addressed the new information about AMD's new exciting chipset, their new offerings in terms of the launch, their power, their performance, and most importantly, their outperformance on paper. We don't know yet on paper of the current Intel offering. And I, for one, am excited, Nick, for when you and I have our down the road. Of course, there's no news announcement coming out or anything, but I'm excited for down the road when we get our 2021 new Intel release, and then we can really start seeing the combatants throw punches, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I can't wait. It's been, despite everything that's happened this year, to say like at least really good tech stuff has come out.
Dude,
Um,
I was thinking the same thing. If you could say anything for the pandemic and what this has done, it has truly driven uh, technology and software in the realm of communications and in the realm of home computing,
yeah,
portable computing.
absolutely.
I think we've had fantastic developments to meet what was an unexpected need in a time that was quite uncertain. Tech companies seem to thrive in moments of uncertainty because they're able to innovate the quickest, or perhaps re-innovate some of what they have to perform better in the marketplace. AMD is doing just that, not only with these chips, but with gaming as well, generally speaking, in consoles. I, for one, am completely excited, and this might be the first time I buy a console in
Yeah,
many, many
me too.
years.
Well, yeah, I mean, I bought a Switch, but I feel like that doesn't really count.
The Switch is I don't even yeah, I guess it's hard to say it's a console, isn't it? It kind of is. I feel like it's a portable gaming device with a TV out. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, I
That's
feel the
not
same way.
Yeah, I mean, that's not an insult. I'm not. I didn't know how to say that without maybe it sounding bad, but that's kind of what it is. The dock is literally just the port for it to connect into the pass through to the TV. That's literally all it is. Am I right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a USB-C pass through to HDMI plus charger. But yeah, like it's a great little handheld device. But yes, I've been looking actually at the PlayStation 5
Me
myself.
too.
I really want to get into ray tracing, so getting one of those 3000 series GPUs is would be nice as well, but right now it's not looking like that's going to happen. Um, that's not
Well,
neither here nor there.
eh, yeah, not for now. Anyway, not for now. Who knows? Maybe if they continue on this, that's not their fault. But if we continue down this path of low to no stock, and AMD does all of a sudden just burst through the walls like the Kool Aid Man and has this awesome GPU and it's readily available, you know, we might be doing this podcast on your new AMD all AMD piece CPU or computer.
Yeah. Um,
That'd be pretty cool.
yeah, man. I can't wait to see what happens and how this all plays out.
Me too.
Not to like bring it back to the pandemic, but throughout this time, it's definitely shown how important this technology is to us at this particular point in time. So, like, meaning like, it's pretty important that we have stable internet and usable computers like that are reliable, and that are fast and cheap. So
100%. 100%. Opportunities are abundant for tech companies, and I'm happy to see that they're taking full advantage of those opportunities. May this innovation continue throughout these interesting times. But as we know that they're there, and we know that they're there for us to use, and that makes me happy. It makes all of us happy, especially if we're gamers. What else has made me happy today is an opportunity to again catch up with everyone that is going to be either a current or future listener, even if you're listening to this years after it first went up. We want to thank you for allowing us to upload this episode and missing a weekend. We both apologize. We That being said, it doesn't need to be said any more than that. Nonetheless, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We were both very happy to bring you this AMD Zen 3 overview. And that's Nick. I don't have much else to say. How about you?
yeah, the only thing else I really have to say is check out the new Doom Eternal Ancient Gods DLC coming out next week.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That's pretty much it. Completely off topic, but I'm definitely gonna be playing that.
Doom's never off topic. It becomes the topic, Nick. We both know that. Now the topic is just Doom, and that's okay. It's always okay. All right, y'all. For myself, again, my name is Mark and Nick. We both say thank you very much for letting us hopefully entertain you for this hour and change. And one day, maybe we'll all join each other on a Ryzen PC. Until then, take care.
Take care and be safe, guys.
All right.